Thanks for joining us at the 2021 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Tammy, and I am a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. And it is my pleasure to introduce our panel, A Keeper, The Evolution of Soccer Analytics. Our panelists today are Ted Knudsen, CEO and founder of StatsBomb, Heather O'Reilly, assistant coach at the University of North Carolina, Ravi Ramaneni, the Vice President of Soccer Analytics and Research at Seattle Sounders. Our panel will be moderated by Greg Berhalter, the head coach of the U.S. men's national soccer team. The panel will run for 35 minutes, and we will leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. Please use the chat at the right side of the window for discussions during the panel. Ask questions using the Q&A function or on Twitter using the hashtag Soccerlytics. With that, I'll turn it over to Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Excited to be here, excited to be taking part of this and to really learn from a bunch of experts we have here. Ted and Ravi, the original godfathers of analytics in soccer, and Heather, one of the best women's soccer players the US has ever had. So welcome, guys. Excited to get started. So Ted, to get started here, where's the use of analytics in soccer now compared to other sports, and why are we at where we are?
It's interesting because on this panel over the years, we've kind of talked about where we think it was going to head, and it was going to take off at some point. And now I think over the last year, we've really seen kind of a rocket ship strapped to the use of data and analytics in soccer. Daryl, a couple of years ago, was making fun of the sport for having bad data and talking about how that would impact the analysis. And I think that, through different providers and also pushes by the team and the national teams to get better data, I think we're finally kind of on that road. And we've seen a ton of hires in MLS this year at the sort of director of analytics levels. We've seen a lot across Europe. So many people across the social media and Twitter spaces are being snapped up and put into real jobs with teams. And it's exciting now. And we don't have to talk about, we think it's going to happen in the future. Like, it is definitely in progress, and there's nothing that's going to stop it.
So a quick ranking of the top 5 sports. Where do we come out? Where does soccer come out?
So I usually look at it sort of alongside American football. I think American football is also having their moments right now. You've seen a lot of traditional sort of pushback against it, but what we're seeing is that the teams have adopted it. Like, it's not even an argument anymore. It's not. They're using it through their decision making. They're using the draft process, all that stuff. That's happening in soccer as well. And then I think hockey is the kind of slow one that's dragging a bit behind. Obviously, baseball and basketball adopted this ages ago, and it's just part of the fabric of the game now.
Okay. And Ravi, where do you think we are on the spectrum of using data for efficiency gains and using data for tactical innovation? So anywhere on that spectrum, where are we?
I think we are much further along in using it for efficiency gains, especially on the recruitment side. We're definitely much further along. And as Ted pointed out, it's becoming a part of the fabric at clubs' decision-making processes that this is one of the inputs that goes into the final decision that is being made. But I think on the tactical side, I think we're probably a little further behind. Most of that is due to lack of the level of detail in the data to be able to break down tactics and be able to quantify some of those. I think we're getting there, but I think on identifying the efficiencies and being able to use the resources better, I think on that front we are much further along.
The physical side as well, wouldn't you say? We're pretty far ahead in that side. Definitely.
Yes, I think, in some ways soccer, as far as I know, soccer is one of the first sports to use GPS trackers and be on the sports science side to use that to talk about training loads and understand that side of the game. So, soccer analytics, when people ask where is soccer analytics with respect to other sports, I think on the sports science side, they're probably, at the forefront from the beginning. Other sports have copied soccer on that front, but on the other side, like tactical, like tracking data, that is just coming into soccer in the last probably five years in a big way.
Heather, I'm really excited to talk to you because you're going to give us the perspective of a player and a coach. So let's start with from a player's perspective. Did you find data helpful?
Well, I'd say that it was an evolving feeling about data. I think, like we're all saying, this is all pretty new in soccer. So I think maybe 10 years ago when we were just starting to like get strapped in with the GPS and have heat maps shown to us and being able to see where our passes were going in games and so on and so forth. I was a little bit sensitive. I'm going to be honest. I was a little bit hesitant because I had like that old school mentality, like we're not robots, we are human beings. And I was a player that really prided myself on a lot of intangible qualities that I brought to every dressing room that I was in. I tried to be a good teammate, I tried to be positive. And of course, I tried to do the right things on the field. So I had this fear that maybe my qualities were going to be overlooked. If
unmeasurable, right?
Yeah,
unmeasurable.
Exactly, because they were somewhat unmeasurable. I think at the end of the day, it was a little bit of a defense mechanism for myself because you can't hide with numbers. You can't hide with numbers. So I do think that I was hesitant, but then as a player, you always want to improve. All the elite players want to improve. So it became a way for me to get better and to look at my game and see some ways that I could improve. I was a wing player actually for most of my career, and I remember one picture in particular. I thought that I was being okay in matches. Like my possession numbers were quite good in terms of the data. I was running a lot. I was always good at good use of meters and covering distance and high speed runs, all that kind of stuff. But I wasn't productive. I wasn't like starting to create chances and have assists and all that stuff. And the use of data actually allowed me to see sort of why that was happening. There was so many times where I was actually playing backwards, playing square, and you could tell that I was sort of in a rut with my confidence. And I could actually see that now on the pitch, in the picture of the pitch rather, through the data. So that was an instance where maybe I, warmed to it a little bit because I could see how this was something that was going to help me and actually gave me a real picture of what I was doing out in the pitch.
That's great. And how did you like it presented to you? What were the most effective ways that you looked at the data? Was it in graphs? Was it numbers? Was it someone going over it with you? How do you prefer to see it?
I think as a player, especially when you're just learning a lot about the data, it's so helpful to have it broken down to you. The worst ever is when a staff or a sports science person just like posts numbers on a door and says, okay, look at the distances you all ran yesterday and who ran the fastest and all, and nobody knows what it means really on the squad. There was no positional breakdown. So I would say the worst presentation is very vague, isn't focused, isn't clear. And I think the best presentation is saying, specifically, maybe position specific, how this data could make you a better player. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what players want.
That's great. Ted, with the widespread adoption of wearable devices combined with improvement in other technologies, what new areas of soccer analytics really excite you?
I think that we've seen a pretty significant addition of context around the data. And part of that is StatsBomb introduced this year StatsBomb 360 data, which is contextual event data. So we know the location of all the players sort of around on the pitch, at each event, which is like 3,300 events a game. And we're starting to see more and more kind of broad scale, like broadcast tracking information coming through, which again is giving you more context about what's actually happening off of the ball. And obviously that's a huge thing. We tried to push that back in 2018 with pressures and understanding what sort of forwards, wide players, midfielders, et cetera, are doing in that way that wouldn't get credited in the sort of traditional tackles and interception stuff. But the reason why you care about all that stuff is, finding line breaking passes and finding players that are able to receive the ball in space, finding those center backs that are able to open play and break lines to progress the ball through from phase to phase. And that's a game type analysis element, but it's certainly a recruitment analysis element. And that's probably the widest use of soccer data in in the space right now, like everybody's looking for the best players at the cheapest price they can find them at, and how do we improve year over year?
What about, go ahead, Ravi.
I want to add something to this. I think is that's one area. I think the other area where what the proliferation of wearables, and I think the cost has been coming down too of these devices and instruments. What that has led to is now you can put GPS trackers on academy kids, U14s, and you're able to get data from a younger age. I think for the first time we will have information to see longitudinally the progress of a player, like how does a winger progress from different age groups, and physically and also tactically, how does he develop? I think we're getting to a point where we can do all that, and I think in general for the general population too, like there are a lot of low price devices that they can use, that even for recreational games there is a even parents can, if they want to, they can see some of that type of information without needing to spend a ton of money. I think that will have a, maybe not this year, next year, but in 5 years, we'll have so much data about the younger groups. I think that'll be really useful.
So there's a two-pronged element there. Like one of them is Greg's group and the U.S. national team sort of taking that down through the development groups. The other thing is we're seeing on social media, like guys just, posting their own sort of five-a-side stats and their running patterns off of five-a-side, which is a bonkers sort of thing, because like you never thought that would be available to people, but it's right out there. Go ahead, Heather.
I was going to add, and Ravi, you're absolutely right. I mean, young kids these days, it's so normal to them. It's so normal to be wearing, either GPS or something that's tracking your touches. I mean, clearly this was something that came into my world post even college soccer. But what is useful is now as a college coach, we can't be having those conversations with these parents that are, see with their rose-colored glasses their kids' ability, because we could say, well, let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the numbers. What distance are they covering? What's their pass completion? How dangerous are their passes? So, you can't really, you can't embellish, I think, as much when, if you're a younger player, exactly where you stand. And I think that there's a lot to gain from that, because as a young person, you have control of your own performance, your own improvement, and it could be really helpful if you use it the right way.
So we talked about where we see analytics now. Ravi, where is it heading? What's going to be next for us in soccer and the use of analytics? What do you see?
I think that's obviously that the answer could go in many directions. I think, as I said earlier, I think we're further along using it in recruitment and able to get efficiencies there. I think the next phase is be able to tie the tactical elements of the game. I think we're getting there now. I'm not saying we haven't done it, but I think we're getting there. But in a big way, we're still not there yet. And be able to tie some of the metrics to game models. For example, something that is very interesting for, very important. The coaches see it, as you know very well. How do we measure if a game model is effective and or if a certain group of players are good in that game model, are they doing well? So for things like that, like, okay, what is a game model? It has multiple phases, and each phase you define some success criteria. What is it that the end product of that phase, and then you build metrics off of metrics that will capture that. It's not, I'm not saying, I won't say that it'll be easy, but I think it is something that is probably the next goal or where we are going. And we are getting tracking data. That's one of the big pieces that will help that. And I think we will probably need, at some level, we'll probably need data beyond what is the current fidelity of the current tracking data.
So Ted, speaking of tracking data, when are we going to get body shape in tracking data? When's that coming?
So we've seen this start to happen in other sports. We've actually seen it in some prototype stuff in the FIFA trials. One of the difficulties is simply the amount of space that is occupied by a football pitch. It's very different than a basketball pitch. You also, like, basketball players tend to be giant humans with giant limbs, and that's a little bit easier to sort of build a shape. But one of the problems that you have with the sort of video fidelity stuff is that you, in fast moments, like, you lose a lot of the player. Even in like a 4K, you lose a bit of it. At a 1080p, you lose quite a bit. So as we're getting to an 8K, I think that this is almost a problem that solves itself, because at a couple of different angles, you have very clean shape. We're not that far away in the soccer space, and we've seen other sports have already solved this, and we kind of often trail that a little bit because they're doing the high tech stuff, and NFL and NBA are spending tens of millions a year on a lot of their tech development. Baseball as well, incredible high speed cameras. I think soccer is moving in that direction.
And
we'll have some cool stuff.
And that's going to help us measure decision making, right? When that's going to lead to us measuring decision making, right?
Yeah, and the availability to make some of these decisions too. Like, body shape is the thing that I won't say that you say it, because but when we hear from coaches, like, what was his orientation, is the other way that it gets spoken about over here. And knowing whether you're ready to play on the half turn, whether you're that type of player, like, that's just another level of fidelity. But I think when we talked about this earlier, Robbie and I talked about the moving goalposts. Like, everybody wants that little bit more, that little bit more. And when you've been around for a while, you're like, look, we barely had useful stats back 6-7 years ago. So it's a changing thing.
So Heather, go ahead, Robbie. Sorry.
Just to add to that, like, I think right now most of the metrics and the data that we have is geared towards evaluating and quantifying the execution of a play, whether it's a pass or as you said, decision making is the next step. And as we answer one question, we're getting 6 more questions, and to answer those questions, we're now going further and further.
Yep. So Heather, speaking of long-term data sets, you played for Anson, and now you coach with Anson, and he's a pioneer of collecting performance data. How have you seen his process evolve over the years?
Yeah, so if you aren't familiar, anybody that's listening, so Greg's referring to my boss, a guy named Anson Dorrance, who's the head coach at the University of North Carolina, and he's been there for like 40 years. And like Greg alluded to, he's like the OG of data in soccer, and very old school though. Like, I'm talking, he essentially employs like 10 to 12 student managers every season. And gives them certain tasks and jobs to do at practice. So they all have their notebook, they all have the roster of players, and they're all keeping stats of, who's winning games, who's losing games, who's scoring goals, who's missing goals. How are they missing goals? Is it a good miss? Is it a bad miss? Because not all misses are created equal. So anyways, his long line of collecting data is pretty infamous, actually. Pete Carroll with Seattle went to Anson Dorrance, and Anson sort of acted as a consultant for him to build what Anson has created. It's called the competitive cauldron. Basically, he keeps stats of all the things that happen at practice, and it's for everyone to see, including all the players. It's not always addressed, but it's always there. And nowadays it's sent to the players every evening. So that's one way, Greg, that it's advanced, because, back in the day, it was maybe like
written on
a board, like, once at the hut. Exactly. Greg and I both played at UNC. So, it was like a once a month update. And now these girls and boys, if they wanted to, if, that staff gets their act together, they could see this data every single night. So that's been a big advancement. But I would say that just from a physical standpoint, I think that Anson has learned a lot from the technology on that side of things. We used to just like grind out fitness tests, and it was like a really big part of the program. But the last 10 years has demonstrated that it probably wasn't the best thing for us to do in terms of loading and actually getting ready for games and getting us game fit. So Anson has evolved in that way, that, now a lot of our fitness and our physical training is done in, 5-a-side matches or more things with the ball that's going to mimic the demands of a match. So I think in that way he has evolved. But I'll tell you what, some of the things that he did with the 91 Women's World Cup team that won the first ever Women's World Cup, he's still doing today, and it's still working, because when you mix competitiveness and heart and emotion with the data, that's when the magic happens. And that's what Anton has been able to do for years and years.
That's great. So Ravi, so in the result orientated business that we're in, right? How do you balance the short-term results versus the long-term processes, especially when you're dealing with technical staff and you're talking about the use of data and you're talking about, having a long-term approach?
That's a great question. I think the way I handle it is basically define go back to game model of the team, which is something that is the team wants to is that's how we want to train, and that's how we want to manifest our players or the game model on the field. So trying to understand that and be able to quantify that and what is it, and breaking it down to a point where you mentioned results oriented business. Now I will work backwards from a result. You win by scoring more goals. To score more goals, you need to create more chances, and create quality chances. Now we're getting into how do you create that, and then you work backwards and try to put together the whole metrics around that to say, okay, this is how we are going to create chances based on the group of players we have, and then measure that. Now there will be week to week fluctuations, and there will be days where we have a great game but we won't win. But be able to have that both discussions where we had a bad result, so why did we have a bad result, and then dig deeper and say, well, we had a bad result, but we did fairly okay with respect to our game model today. We had some things that we couldn't control, like maybe a bad decision here and there, but or the other way around, we win a game, but then the result is great, but be able to keep the group honest in terms of if we're talking results, let's talk results, but if we're talking process, let's talk process. I think a lot of times it becomes the problem comes when we pick one of them based on what suits us.
Right.
When we have results,
Yeah, Heather, do you think even in a loss, like you can, as a player and now as a coach, that data can reassure you of the effort or reassure you of the process?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think Robbie's correct in saying that you do have to be honest in terms of if your performance wasn't good but you won. You probably shouldn't just sweep it under the rug and pretend all those mistakes didn't happen. You should probably address those. But I do think that there's something to be said of finding a way to win. So that's actually that's part of it. And I think that's when we went back to those intangible things, I think when the data and the numbers say one thing and you're still able to dig out results, that's data of itself. And that's interesting of itself. So yeah, certainly I think self-awareness and honesty is super critical, and also just a focus and clarity. I think that a staff just has to be very focused on what you're looking for, what you're looking for, like you said, Greg, in your game model and your processes, because as we know, we can get very distracted, very
emotion.
Yeah, the emotion comes into it, or maybe you want too many things to change and you kind of go down another path. So you got to stay on task, I think.
Okay, so Ted, switching to on the field, what analytic tools are there that can help the coaching staff and players evaluate in real time? Strategy, their own game model, what are we doing on the field that's going to help us right now, currently?
So this is changing rapidly, and FIFA have actually been at the forefront of this. I heard from some people inside the FIFA technical group, 4 or 5 years ago that, this had been an impetus of Blatter before he left. He wanted to change his surroundings, where VAR came from, etc. So allowing staffs to actually use iPads and receive information is important. The problem there is like things are happening so quickly, and also the communication to your players is difficult, especially when fans are in stadia, and in some cases it is a cauldron. You don't get that ability to communicate. But there's a combination of stuff where you're looking at and saying, okay, we're having little breakdowns here in our spacing, or we're having we're allowing too much space here, there. The other thing, that's I think the tracking data comes a couple of seconds behind, or not a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes behind. And so like you can get consistent information, but then how quickly can you then take that info, process it, get it out there and communicate it? I think that's a huge challenge, and finding those little bits and really understanding your game model and what you're looking for against this team or that team or your team is the tough part of the coach's side. And I think we're very much in the early stages of finding out how to blend this information and make it useful.
Okay, so we got that information, right? We're collecting it during the game. Ravi, we go into halftime, and you need to give the technical staff, right, short bits of info. How many minutes do we have in halftime, right, that we can actually address the players? 3 or 4 minutes?
That's it, right? There's not more, and depends on the stadium too. Sometimes even less. So
how are you going to do it?
So the way we do it is, I think, so for any real-time process like that, where time of delivery is like at a premium, what you have to do is you have to do a lot of homework and prepare a lot of things. Meaning, so I have a conversation with our coaches, assistant coaches. Hey, we're playing this team tomorrow. What do we want to? What are the key things that we need to capture from video, and from mostly video, because I think and also data, because we're also tagging the video at the same time. So let's say we would try to attack the half spaces, and we want to know how many times we get into the half space against this team. So that's something, and define something so clear, like very, very clear and simple goals. And we can prepare that data and can send that down to the bench as the game is going on, or have that ready with a few clips lined up to show them at halftime. We can even send clips down. Obviously there are various tools that a lot of teams use now, where, like, for example, you can have an iPad on the bench and be able to see what the video analyst is tagging, and be able to click and see the clip with a few second delay. But I think like the premium is on getting the right information and the right information. So a lot of you have to do a lot of legwork before, and obviously once you get into a rhythm of doing this game in, game out, you get a sense, you get a lot of understanding of how what is going to be important, or what you see something that we didn't talk about, and then that might be useful, and you have that clip ready to go. But I'll also tell you this, that if we do 100 games like this, prepare everything and take everything down, take clips down halftime, have them ready, the coaches may use them only 20 times. Meaning that there is, sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes there is no need to use the information. There is, players know, and coaches watched it from the sideline. So there is always like less is more with that, because players are at 180 beats per minute, 200 beats, whatever. Like, they're running so hot. They come in, and if you try to, give like a lecture about tactics, then that may not go in. So I think we have to know. I think there is a very premium on being very efficient in delivering the piece of information.
And Heather, when would you change your strategy? So you're watching the game, the first half of the game, and everything's going fine. Would you change your strategy?
I think that, like Ravi said, it has to be something. You're saying, would I change it during the first half, or wait till halftime, or either?
Either.
Yeah, it would have to be something, I think, very obvious, and something that we can pinpoint is going to be super influential to the game. Something like, maybe when we talk about your emotions taking over, say your captain and 35-year-old center midfielder is having an atrocious game, and his completion for passes in the first half is like at 40%. Which clearly for his position is way low, but maybe, you love the guy and he's such an influential part of the team, but the right decision is to substitute that guy. And something like that might be one thing that at halftime could be like sort of reassuring to the coaching staff. Okay, like did we see what we just saw? Like we all saw how poor he was, right? And you see the stats, or that's just a simple example. Or like maybe if you feel a sense that you're going down one side of the field a lot and it's unsuccessful. You probably feel it as a coach, Greg, as you know. But maybe seeing that heat map, maybe seeing those pass maps, will sort of solidify your decision making. So I'm hard pressed to think that it will get to the point that during the half in real time we'll be making adjustments based on some drones from above that are pointing out some tactics, but never say never. I mean, we've come a far way in the last 10 years, like Ted said.
I think you're probably more likely to make defensive adjustments. Like if you feel particularly open, and that's also validated by what you're getting in the data, like that's a thing that you want to do as quickly as possible, because it's a low scoring game, and so your attack, maybe it takes time to gel, but like if you feel like you've got a defensive hole, you shore that up as soon as possible so that you don't give something away and the game runs away.
Well, conversely, Ted, if you found a defensive deficiency in the opponent, wouldn't you want to exploit that as quickly as possible?
Can you do that? Can you find that? You tell me. You're the one.
But can you find that, or do you need that? Do you need Ted being in your ear to tell you that?
I always found, like at the team level, I always found that I loved being up high to see stuff. Like you just saw so much more happening, and it wasn't in your face all the time. Especially some of the rounded pitches that you get in different places, like that makes it even harder to see what's happening on the far side of the field. And so having the people up high, they're definitely getting a different picture and a little more distance.
So the audience has been asking some questions, and I have a great one here. How are weather conditions being accounted for in those game models? And then one thing I haven't seen a lot in sport is using data to optimize performance in different weather conditions. That's interesting, right? So if you have a really high pressing team, or, for us thinking about the national team, having to go in some of the CONCACAF fields we play on, and the fields, having grass 4.5 inches high and dried mud, really, does it, how can we use data to help advise the coaching staff? Maybe we shouldn't be passing the ball on the ground this game, or maybe we can't high press, right?
But this is a classic mid-season England problem, right? Like, especially in the lower leagues, like the pitches become mud. I think we've seen that problem, especially on the women's side, where sometimes they play at lesser fields, and so the FAWSL top league, like sometimes you're still playing in mud baths, and it looks like it's the 70s and 80s now. One of the temperature thing is quite interesting, because I think we're coming a long way, as Heather mentioned. Anson's early stuff, he's an active learner. He's learned about how to manage that stuff better. But like that World Cup in Brazil was one of the places where people spent a lot of time trying to figure out how should we be adaptive to player loads and player workloads, and what should our recovery periods look like. And then there's I know some gambling groups that did a lot of studies on what happens in high temperature games versus low temperature games, and what should we expect in scoring and attacking opportunities and stuff like that. It's available out there. It's not necessarily used as much as you like. And the surface that you talk about, like that's almost impossible to get useful data on, to be honest. Like we can see a muddy surface, but like a long grass with we don't have that.
Well, my question is, could you go back to the venue and say, okay, let's look at the passing percentages at this venue, and let's look at the standard deviation for what teams are expected to make, what they're actually making on this surface?
Yeah, and it's you could say data in a lesser extent, or a much more general way, is one of the reasons why FIFA outlawed playing at certain altitudes, right? Because
exactly.
And also why the MLS has two teams that have the highest home field advantage normally in the entirety of the world. And that's in Utah and Colorado.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, the other thing is like, just to add to that, like, for example, like, when you talk about, you go to that muddy field with high grass and you play. Now, players are also adapt to that condition. So then it will be hard to kind of tease out that element where you go there, you're already adapted, and you're passing differently, you're running differently, slowing the game down, or maybe going more direct. So there will be a lot of variables that change. So it'll be a harder problem to tackle.
So Ravi, we talked about what we're doing in soccer with analytics right now. We talked about the on-field usage of analytics. Now, talk to me briefly about the relationship, the importance of the relationship between the analytics department and the technical staff. And what are some keys to having a successful relationship?
I think I would say the number one thing is building trust. There should be a good trust between the analytics department and the technical staff, and the onus generally falls to some degree on the analytics people to be able to demonstrate that they can help the coaching staff with preparing them for the games. And I think just in terms of that, just knowing when to talk and when to listen is a very important aspect to show that you're willing to learn and implement and go further from there. I feel like that, and then and then I said, okay, just showing the staff that the information will be useful. Well, how do you do that? I think what is normally coaches are used to watching a lot of video, seeing things on the field, even players, same thing. So if you can, instead of giving just the numbers or just the graphs and or heat maps, if you show how if you first understand how the numbers manifest on the field, what does it mean to be able to enter what is like a 1-2 and entering into a half space? What does it look like? And when you said this shot has an expected goal of 40%, what does that mean? What are all the other 40% expected goal shots look like? And if you can build that type of, if you can show that and get them to understand, they will ask you questions about the model, and before you know it, they will understand the model, or they will ask you very intelligent questions about it. And I think that's the part where once you, to me, like that's where you build the trust. I think that is the most important thing.
That's great. Heather, do you have daily interactions with your analyst department? And if you do, what are you looking for in those interactions?
Yeah, I think like Ravi said, I mean, trust and clarity, I think are just two key elements that come from the data. I think one important tool that we use that I know is commonplace now for a lot of teams is daily monitoring, morning monitoring. And in doing so, that takes a lot of trust, because it takes trust from the analysts, from the players, and from the coaching staff, that we are all looking at that data. We're looking at it with an eye to help the players improve, to help them feel well, and to, ultimately to train well and then to win games. So I think that's a good example of where trust is just absolutely critical, because you're not
using the information against them.
Yeah. And I think that even for me as a player, I think I would always be like, no, I feel great. No, I feel great. When meanwhile, I was super burned out and probably not feeling great. And it could have been really helpful for me to have an intervention of some kind, maybe with a sports science person or my coach, to just say like, Heather, I think it would be really useful for you to like take a few days off. I think that like you're running on fumes a little bit, and we can see it. But I don't think I quite trusted the data or the delivery, that this wasn't just me being benched, that this was actually them caring about me and thinking that like this was going to help me. So I think that trust is absolutely critical.
And I'm sure you would have listened to them, right, Heather? And taken a few days off. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Ted, the question I have for you is, if you can give advice to soccer clubs, one piece of advice to soccer clubs regarding analytics, what would it be?
See, I wanted to push this back towards you. You had this great anecdote about how you and Heather was talking about, sort of the physical stuff, and you work with all of these different teams and club teams at the national team. You have this handoff of players, and players have their own individualized routines now, and you've got all this stuff that they keep track of. And I found that fascinating, much more so than I'm going to tell people to get set piece analysts like I do almost every year.
So the way we're looking at this, Ted, is that, there's gaps, right? Gaps in information, and all we're trying to do is close the gaps. The more we can know about what the player's doing, I think the more informed decisions we can make in playing time, training time, injury prevention. So we're trying to close those gaps, and we're doing a great job of sharing, of gathering information from the clubs. All the clubs have been really supportive of sending data, 4 weeks of data before guys get into camp. And then in the meantime, we're providing, data back to them in real time. So they can see every single day what we're doing with the athlete. They can see the morning screens. They can see the load. They can see, you name it. They can get a view of it, what treatments they're getting. So I think it's a really a good way for us, a picture of the athlete and what he's doing.
It feels very different than Robin Van Persie would just come back injured off of every international break to Arsenal and just made me sad every time. So it seems a big progress there.
All right, one piece of advice. What is it though? Come on.
No, seriously, set piece analyst is like table stakes now. It's a huge part of the game. People know that it's a big difference. A lot of the teams that we've worked with have picked up on it and seen, upticks in a lot of useful areas, including their number of goals scored off of these different phases. And it really just is a restart of a phase. The throw-in stuff.
So a total one person that's just in charge of set pieces.
Yeah, it's like 30 to 50 hours a week and is a minor coaching job as well. And in some cases, you need to build the technique of long throws. Every year I ask Ravi to put more long throws into his process. And, occasionally we see it on video.
So Ted, tell me how many people actually do that job though? I mean, for the national team, I've been looking for someone. There's like 6 people in the world that are doing that.
You have my phone number. So I think that's actually a big challenge, but we're seeing these kids that, kind of grew up as fans. Like we taught a course last year during the pandemic, shortly after Sloan actually, and we had 99 people attend as a virtual course. 70 of them were in professional football and half of the Premier League attended. So there are some resources and this job is like just there for people to come fit it, because as you know, like this is important, and especially for knockout tournaments is really big deal if you get a couple extra goals per tournament.
What was the last World Cup? 38% of the goals were scored on set pieces. So that's what it was. It was high, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's also because the defenses are better, the attacks are less polished at that point, and so you're looking for any ability to get a little edge.
Yep. So Ravi, we got you're a coach. And, I always found that the best way to engage the analytics group is to just ask questions, right? You got one question to ask the analytics group that you need answered as a coach. What are you going to ask them?
This is a difficult one. I think, I'll make my, my thought process as I go. What I would want is someone to, like the analyst, to tell me, I know my top players, like top 2 or top 3 players in the team, or I have like super talented number 10 and a number 9. Okay, what is the complementary players that we need to have on the field to maximize these 2 guys? Because, for example, if I have Messi in my team, so what is the group that I can put around him so that I can keep winning? I can, so, and that's not simple plus minus or, some, very simple thing, shallow thing like that. It's a lot more about like, what are the qualities, how can I bring out the best qualities of the best players on my team? And then have the structure to support them so that they can, because I know they can win the game and the championship for our team, but we need to have 11 guys working together. So I will try to get the Yeah.
That's great. Heather, what do you have? What's your one question? You are a coach, so what's the one question you're dying to ask your analyst department and have them work on?
Well, I think like for me, like defending is a little bit more rules based, a little bit like maybe less creative. So I would have the analysts, I think from a defending and backline specifically, I think you don't always pay for it when you make a defensive mistake. Like if there's not a goal scored against you, maybe you get away with a bad habit, but I would like maybe some sort of way to grade our defenders on how they did and were they always weak side, tucked in, because that's not really a stat that I know of that would show up. Are they tight to their, other backline defenders? So things off the ball, I think, would be really helpful when you're thinking about your backline and trying not to give up goals.
That's great. Good answer. All right, I think we're getting towards the end. You guys have anything for me before we finish up? I know Ravi, you want to ask something.
I have one question for you. How do you manage halftime?
Oh, good question. So very similar to the process that you described. You know, we have an iPad on the bench. We're actively communicating with the analyst to start acquiring clips that we can present to the team at halftime, or we could at least look at halftime. But the other thing we started to do is to collect, data sets on our KPIs, trying to start measuring some of our KPIs at halftime. So when I go into the coach's room, the first thing I'm getting is the iPad filled with the clips that we requested, and maybe some additional ones that the analyst saw. And the second thing, I'm getting a quick snapshot of the KPIs that we're measuring in the game. And that's helping to prepare the halftime talk. From there, what I decide is, okay, are we going to actually show them clips, or is it an easy enough adjustment that I could use a tactics board to communicate what we're trying to do?
I think what you just said is showing how data is now changing coaching, because you actually need to really understand how to make your game model quantifiable. And game model, for people who don't understand, is how you play soccer or how you play football. So you have to start to break down, how can we make this quantifiable? And then how do we interrogate it to make sure that we're playing the way that we want to in every match, or stopping the opponent from playing the way that they want to. And I think that is a difference that we've seen versus 5 years ago, coaches being aware of that and now starting to be more open and ask themselves those questions.
That's right. Can we request a couple more hours, guys, for this? It seems like we're done. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're busy. You're out in LA about to call a game tomorrow. So thank you for joining. Ravi and Ted, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Greg.
And great
Appreciate
job,
it.
Greg. I mean,
Greg.
a man that's wearing many hats, coach of the national team and king moderator. So great job.
Of the nerd panel. It's
Yeah,
not
of
just any
the
panel.
nerd fest. Keep it up, smarties.
Are we still on the air?